Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. Today we're going to talk about the religion of aliens, as promised. I went back and listened to the near 2-hour episode I did, and it's funny how when the video goes wrong or the audio goes wrong, and you go back and you listen to it and you're thinking, geez, it's probably a good thing that episode died. My energy was good information, it's just my energy was not at the right level for a season 4 episode. So anyway, welcome back. So what is this episode about? I was going to go through a couple different stages. It was all sort of spawned by a listener who was commenting in the YouTube comments, and he said, you should go check out Dr. David Jacobs. Dr. David Jacobs, I hadn't heard of him before, is an individual who is, I guess, good friends with John Hopkins of that medical institution, who is a hypnosis guy, hypnotist. And so in the 60s, Dr. David Jacobs wrote a paper about how UFOs were affecting society, got his PhD. I don't know how you do that. I don't know what his PhD was in. I forgot. I watched about 3.5 hours of interviews with him. He's extremely repetitive, so if you ever want to research this guy, just find yourself about an hour's worth of interview, and you will not hear anything new from different interviews. But if you listen to this episode, you probably can skip all that research yourself. Like a lot of us, he was very curious. As the story goes, in 1985, Dr. David Jacobs began to, in an amateur sense, and he's very forthcoming in this, began to interview people who said they were abducted by aliens. He also was very concerned with something called confabulation, which is when the hypnotist suggests something to the person and the person goes with that suggestion. And when you have someone who's willing to be led by you on a routine basis within a hypnotist or hypnotic session, then you're probably dealing with someone that's very untrustworthy. Not necessarily a bad person, they go with the flow a little too much, right? When you listen to a David Jacobs video, he spends about 10 minutes going through the problems of hypnotic sessions, confabulation, and the fact that he's an amateur. He says that a person who is willing to be hypnotized is actually not truly under any spell. They just are agreeing to be questioned and they're agreeing to go down deeper into the suggestive realm of their brain, but they should be cognitive of what happened while they were down. And his big thing was, he goes, I do this in the room sometimes with, 2 people. So I got one person going under and the other person, my voice with the words that I'm saying, and the other person's listening and they're not going under. He goes, that should show you how you have to participate in this process. I thought that was fascinating because I never heard anyone say that before. I've only remotely attempted hypnosis with a good friend of mine. If you listen to all my episodes, my friend who is the true autist without vaccinations, brilliant guy, he put me under hypnosis for probably about 4 or 5 hours, trying to see if there was something about this alien thing because of my Christmas present thing when back in 1990. And we didn't really find anything. I felt like I remembered everything, but time really did pass. But what Dr. David Jacobs is getting at really started to peel away where the evolution of the theory of aliens is going. Now, I just did an episode that said, gray aliens exist. So you know where my position is, at least with those individuals. But I also believe that God exists and that Christians know fuck all about God, right? I think if you want to get in as much trouble as you possibly can with your Creator, and I don't believe our Creator gets angry whatsoever, but if there were such a thing, go worship Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and then go talk to your God, and it's just going to be one of these looks from God of The fuck were you doing? I told you everything. It's, the kingdom of God is within all men. You didn't need anything else. So I don't, when I go at the alien culture and the movement around the alien culture in this episode, I don't want you to believe that I'm against you, especially if you believe in aliens. I just made an episode where I say that the Roswell crash eyewitness testimonies and secondhand testimonies of those married to or the sons and daughters thereof of the individuals who have nothing to gain, who are on their deathbeds. I mean, we've seen them now. We've seen people really old start to give up some stuff. And there are people who are giving up stories that I think are actually untrue. But it's weird. There's a distinct purity with those that give up their stories in Roswell and those that are in modern day confessions in the last 10 years. Because the ones I watched were at least 25 years old, if not 40, 50 years old. For me, that's just validation that goes places. And being from a small little town in the Midwest, I know what old people are like. I know what tall tales sound like. I know the tone of their voice when they go in that direction. According to me. Okay. But Dr. David Jacobs starts his tale in 1985, which is a very interesting time because this is about the time that Whitley Strieber started figuring out, oh my God, I may never sell another book again into movie rights like Cat People, and so I'm going to start getting on to this new thing, which is this big alien abduction thing. It's a kind of a new trendy way to write and thing to write about. And so he writes the book Communion and says that he's getting abducted like 24/7 up in upstate New York. It's unbelievable, right? Then he writes Transformation. Then he writes his third book. I forgot what it's all about. It'll come to me. But he just basically makes a shit ton of money off this. He also writes a little paperback on the side called Project Majestic, which was great. So there was definitely a writing trend. A publisher was saying, this is a cool thing to write about. Very similar to the doomsday stories of 2012 and all this other stuff. So, I don't know. Maybe Jacobs is one of those guys. I don't know. He's definitely much better at seeming honest if he is dishonest than most folks. But I'm just going to go with the fact that maybe he's telling the truth about what he discovers, because his routine is to interview people during hypnotic sessions as the hypnotist. He, again, tries to weigh out confabulation. And the example he gives for confabulation is he says, look, someone will say they woke up in their home or whatever, some location, and there's a light in the room. And he goes, what I'll typically do to figure out whether or not they're going to be susceptible to suggestibility is, he says, I'll say, oh, so the light filled the entire room? Because they haven't said how much the light fills the room. And he says if they go, oh, yeah, totally, then he puts a little tick in their sheet and says, well, this person's going to go with my suggestion. But if they say, no, it's like coming in one window, not the whole room, then he's like, okay, they're owning their own experience. Whether it be a dream or what have you, it's there. So where does religion come into this? I have a choice here. I can tell you Dr. Jacobs' entire story about the evolution of these interviews, because he's telling us that when he started interviewing in the 80s, he says most of the stories were all about gray aliens. That was it. And then, as he goes into the 90s and the 2000s, the 21st century, it starts turning into all these stories about hybrids. Now, some people who've interviewed him have been very astute, and they said, don't you think, Mr. Jacobs, Dr. Jacobs, that this could just be the fact that the story has evolved in movies, the story has evolved among people on the internet, and so this hybrid theory is really starting to become popular, and now you're just getting the feedback loop. And he's like, yeah, but he doesn't really want to admit that. He never really does a deep dive in the interview, but the people interviewing him are hip to the fact that that's probably what's occurring, right? But Dr. Jacobs says, well, there's so much detail in these stories about hybrids, I find it hard to believe that some of the IQs of people that I've interviewed, I'm paraphrasing, of course, could come up with such details. And I think, well, that's because you underestimate man. Again, you could have someone with a 50 IQ who's dreaming THX 1138 8K 16K movies of incredible proportions, and when they wake up they couldn't add 1 plus 1. So there's knowledge within and there's knowledge outside of us, right? There's physical human body 5 sense knowledge, and then there's your soul knowledge, which might just well be infinite. One of the things that you'll hear out of Jacobs really early is that he believes that if you've ever reported any abduction with him, that the trend by those that are more capable of giving the details is that you have been chosen your entire life. Wow, that's powerful, right? And this is where we start stepping our foot into the shallow shores of religion with this UFO movement. Well, wouldn't that make you feel special? That you've been chosen to be this way? Maybe you have DNA that's special. Maybe you're a hybrid and you don't even know it. Or maybe that you just got randomly picked at the beginning and now you have sort of special access, you know. Somebody always lives next to Ozzy Osbourne and becomes the neighbor, you know, becomes a family friend as long as you're not a jerk off. And so, boy, if you like 80s rock, you know, you're living next to a legend. You can get him on the phone. You can go knock on the door. You get invited to Christmas. So it's one way or the other. It's really funny. I've had a funny little moment with that whole theory, and this is not, I'm not being terribly serious here, but when I was a kid, like a baby, they would, when I got taken back from Europe to Kansas to visit my family, they would put me outside in a crib with, you know, the sky. I would sit as a child looking at the moon, looking at the stars, as a baby, unable to speak. But I remembered what the adults told me. It's really interesting. I remember the scene where my mom was pointing at the moon and goes, "There's men up there right now." And I was like, I can't talk, but I get you. Like, I totally remember her saying that. And I remember, without having a hell of a lot of context, as a tiny baby, having enough soul memory and soul knowledge. You know, when I brought to the baby's body, the fetus that I inhibited, I remember what that meant. And as a baby, you wouldn't have any context for moon, men, there, all that kind of stuff. It's fascinating, right? But here I am outside in this crib. It's like, hey, if aliens want to come by and go, hey, you should get a little chip. You know, hey, I was out there. So far, I haven't found any alien implants. But Dr. Jacobs is not alone in this notion that he believes that people have been abducted for life, that they have these traumatic experiences that go back to their childhood. And he uses hypnosis to do it, to figure out, to mine it. I think it's very interesting. Hypnosis is predicated on the notion, in most cases, that we are nothing but human bodies with a bag of chemicals. When you go to Scientology, and the people that, you know, that Scientology is based on, they will say, no, this is actually talking to your soul, and you're going to be able to regress back to what you were before. It's Scientology's whole shtick. Hey, there may be something to it. But the number of chicks I've talked to who think they were Nefertiti means that she was possessed by at least 1,000 chicks from the Midwest. Everyone was a pharaoh. Everybody was Winston Churchill, right? But when you tell someone that they're chosen, my God, you create this unity. You create this feeling that it's like, well, I don't know why I would be chosen. I don't feel different as a human being, but there must be something special about me. So perhaps my opinions of all things are validated above all others. It's funny how you'll meet an evangelical Christian person, and they will be telling you how they have the way. You need to be rebaptized because the baptized that you had was on fucking discount, was a piece of shit baptism. And, you know, God has bestowed it upon their leader to give you the good kind. But when you really dive deep into their intellect and their knowledge of the Bible in general, it's pretty shallow in most cases. The best I've ever found is an old man who can pull up in the Bible and hit every single verse. Oh, you know, it's funny you mentioned that. Boom, he pops that open. He finds a really profound verse that matches what you're talking about, and that's cool. But he's just a Jeopardy contestant at that point, right? He's not getting into the super subtextual context and the super metaphor and allegory that is the Bible itself. So walking around thinking that, hey, I got a new roommate, my ass hurts, and I'm going to pawn it off on anal probes over here instead of kicking this guy out for roofing me every night, that's how you feel special. Now, it could be, obviously. Everything I'm kind of playing devil's advocate to could be actually true. But I think if you're chosen, and there's something super special about your conscious DNA, we will know. I would think that your measurable IQ might be a little bit higher, but maybe not. Maybe the methodology that we measure IQ by, which is critical thinking and deduction, isn't the quality that is being augmented in you. But I would assume that there's something. Maybe you can build a skyscraper out of matchsticks or something. There's something about you. If not, you're just a normal person and you were selected and you're being constantly visited, and good for you. Hope your body holds together. But I mentioned this a little bit in the first episode of season 4. Why do we believe in aliens at all? Because we didn't a long time ago. 500 years ago or before. The only thing that remotely felt like aliens were angels and demons. From the sky comes these agents of God. And, it was interesting because then it switched over after Roswell to people from space. And then it took us, 70 years to start demonizing these guys as angels or demons, right? Interesting. Why do we believe in dinosaurs? Again, man excavated metric cities of soil out of the ground before the late 1850s when a single tooth was found and a bullshit dinosaur was built around that tooth, which just so happens to match all the dinosaurs today. We never found any dinosaur bones before 1850s. The two guys that found the first two, a femur bone and a tooth, and went at it for 40 years, their entire life's career was deprecated as utter fraud in the spirit of competing with each other. But everything that they found and fabricated was then adopted by natural history museums, and now it is the way it is. So where did we get aliens? Could it be so easy? Oh yes, it could be so easy. Why don't we hear about miracles anymore? Like the ones written in the Bible, like a Christ walking around. Why isn't God, visiting half of us who are like Sauls and transforming us into Pauls? Why isn't someone in Ezekiel? Why isn't someone a prophet? I mean, a real prophet, man. They say this shit's going to happen on this day, and it happens. Because we have a printing press, and nearly every human being on Earth carries with them 2 HD cameras. And there is no evidence of anything going on. Even ghosts have taken a big back seat to modern technology. Well, why did Christ end? Why was he the last giant prophet that anyone had fabricated into existence? Because the printing press came around. And eventually in the 20th century, really in the 19th century, but you have cameras and video cameras. Then cell phones. 21st century is locked down surveillance-wise. If Jesus ever tried to show up, or anybody tried to show up, we'd have him in HD. We'd have them in a face recognition database. We'd probably have them on Facebook, But now, what if things like aliens are not biblically bound? They are simply the result of a random visit. Because to answer our question, we believe in aliens because the world became round. And we became severely insignificant, like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. We're in the total perspective vortex 24/7. An infinite small dot on an infinite small dot, infinitely small. Within the realm of man's common understanding, we live on a planet that has a solar system that's in a galaxy that's in a universe. Dipshits still believe in the Big Bang. Unbelievable. Unfucking believable. That theory keeps going. But regardless of the Big Bang, we have this mathematical notion that if we are serendipitously just here, as this random event, something from nothing theory of existence, when all life on Earth is beautiful and looks like it's hand manicured and designed, I mean, hell, we got color schemes on things, fish and insects and, praying mantis that look like they're literally like God's little Lamborghini, was a lot of proof, in my opinion, that there's a divine intervention into what's going on here. But eventually, someone just comes up with a theory. Of course, there are going to be other life beings out there. And, of course, they're not going to be influenced by the Earth's gravity, all Earth's experiences, the other indigenous creatures of this planet, our fish, our insects, our animals, whatever. They may not breathe pure oxygen, da-da-da. And so, not that we do either, but this theory is hatched, and we're waiting for something to galvanize it into the intellect of man. What event is going to finally make this true, right? They theorized the dinosaur. One of Darwin's disciples theorizes it, and then boom, we found a tooth. Wow, how fucking convenient, right? Again, Roswell, interesting. Maybe they conducted a big MKUltra experiment on a whole town of Roswell, and got everybody to say a particular story, drugged them, just like Jacob's Ladder, the movie, exposed them to pictures and dolls and all this other stuff, and, rehearsed stories with them and told them things while they were asleep, and everyone comes out of it saying, yes, real, and I look at it and I personally, with my travels, go, man, that seems like that person's telling the truth. Maybe. Never been theorized, but that'd be a good little X-File episode, wouldn't it? But that's why we believe in aliens. It's because we have advanced our theory up inside of our brains that we can't be the only ones here. It doesn't matter if you believe in a firmament dome either. You could adopt this theory either way. They're the dome owners. They're some other servant of God. The one thing I forgot to mention in the Gray Aliens episode that I have seen pretty well animated online, which is very interesting, just someone trying to give you an idea of what it was that Gray Aliens are angels. This is when it was in the angel state, not the demon state, and that people said they were being abducted, waking up inside these spacecraft, and the aliens were showing them the souls that were going to be their children, their relatives, their friends, or they would show them a soul that had passed on, like a mother who had passed away, but the woman is actually pregnant, so she's saying, here's your mom. You can sense it's your mom. It's a glowing ball of light. Say hi. And we're going to put this soul into your fetus. And so you're going to give birth to your mother. That's a pretty cool little sci-fi story, right? Nothing against a good story. So I think it's interesting to review. It's important to review how we gain this theory of aliens. And again, it seems like the 1947 crash of Roswell is a very catalyzing event for the validation of such things. But going back to Dr. David Jacobs, he said that the stories that he was getting out of people, he still says it to this day, have evolved tremendously. Again, for a very long time, I'm going to guess maybe 10 years, most of the abductions were always gray aliens, gray aliens, gray aliens. As the internet seems to have come online between 85 and 95, the idea of hybrids starts to cross-pollinate into society, and all of a sudden, his stories slowly transform into hybrids. Half human-looking, half gray-looking beings. He has another name for one of them, which is a human hybrid, which is what I assume the hybrids are anyway. But one of them is very, very human-like, and you can't tell the difference, supposedly, besides their behavior, right? This goes all the way out of Gray's abducting folks, all the way up to these alien humans that are sequestering apartments with their captors. So they're saying, you have to put me up in New York City in your suite. You can't have a boyfriend. You can't have a girlfriend. You have to harbor us. And he says it's like there's 2-to-1 at least ratio. If you talk about it, they say that they'll threaten to kill the people and all this other stuff. Okay. He even went as far as to say that some of them have threatened to kill him, the doctor, for engaging in hypnosis and trying to figure out who these people are. So he puts himself at this great martyrdom risk factor that, man, I am a paladin for truth, because I have my life threatened by aliens. But when you really think it through about an alien that would be threatening, again, you're talking about an advanced intellect issuing threats. Well, threats are not usually the way to get anything done in this world, right? If you're going to do something, you just do it. It's just that simple. Maybe you put one caution out there, but after that, you got to follow up with your threat. Otherwise, your word is worth nothing. You're the boy that called wolf that never makes anything take place. All right. So I find that hard to believe. I find someone is just making that shit up. The fact that this guy has personally never been visited by one is also one of these kind of things of like, really? You're sort of an authority on earth about this kind of stuff, and they know you exist, and they're threatening their subjects with hurting you, and they don't visit you and say, hey, we got some shit coming, and you're fucking it all up, and if you like being in one piece, if you like having a wife and kids and whatever, shut your pie hole, dude. That never happens. So they lack the most basic thought process / cause and effect mechanisms of mankind. This is where aliens start to become, just like religion, very man-like, right? God has never been more hobbled and more trivialized than religion trying to explain man, or explain God, excuse me, right? God gets mad like a little baby. Bullshit, he gets mad. Go see my episode, Does God Get Angry? It's all bullshit. A supreme being does not get angry. It just doesn't. Just a few times more intelligent than mankind, and that being, if you had a guy here, so 180 is supposed to be the top IQ, and I hate saying IQ because it's sort of a BS construct, but anyway, let's just say whatever we want to measure the most intelligence by, we give a human being 4 times the intelligence of the average human being's maximum apex of intelligence. Do you think that person with 4 times the IQ could ever get angry on this planet? No, because everything that's going to happen to them, they could predict it. Oh, I bet that kid's going to break. Oh, yep, they did. Oh, I bet he's going to cheat on his girlfriend. Oh, yeah, so totally did. Yeah, because I'm that smart. And you have God that's infinitely holding this whole place together with all of his algorithms. Yeah, I'm sure he gets really upset. Because he's got a lot of surprises in his life. The burden of God is that he knows not the feeling of opening a Christmas present. How sacrificial is that, man? He, by definition, cannot limit his knowledge of anything. Otherwise, a huge sector of the universe ceases to exist. These are my feelings, of course. But there's another religious construct coming up through Dr. Jacobs' personal sessions. And I'm assuming that other people that do these hypnotic sessions are having the same feedback, which is that they are being told by the Greys and by these hybrids or whatever that something great is coming. Something great is coming. And when the humans go, well, okay, great. What is it? We can't tell you. Okay. All right. So we have 2 things happening. We have a very second coming arc of a story coming, which is, hey, something's great, it's coming your way. But because the human being may be embellishing and lying about the whole thing, they don't want to have to speculate what that is, and so it's all hidden. It's all completely hidden. Okay. Now, I've said a couple times on the show, I'm going to review it with you very quickly. I used to watch or listen to Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie and Art Bell way back in the day. And there's a pattern. I think it's really just a PSYOP training ground. You want to see how well you can lie? Do it. And it's not all that people are involved with intelligence agencies or anything like that, but boy, they're pining for it, let me tell you. But all the interviews of outrageous claims go exactly the same way on that show. Someone comes on and they've written a book, or usually they've written a book, or they're a return guest, and they are propped up for a reason. And George Norrie will go through it, introduce them. And for instance, one of them was a gentleman that came on and said that he was a time traveler, that he was going to lots of different planets and spending years there, and that he even traveled with Barack Obama at one point. Well, that bunch of fucking bullshit. Why? Because some liberal wants to make him even more insane, right? More intense, more, oh fuck, man, he's in the inside. He even accused one of his acquaintances of going with him, and that guy called up the show by the end of the show and said, you and I have only met one time at a trade show. I have no fucking clue who you are. Just so your listeners know, Mr. Norrie, I don't know this guy. We've never done anything together. He's a liar. And what's the guy say? Absolutely brilliant response. He says, well, in your timeline, it hasn't happened yet. Boom. Like, unbelievable, man. Unbelievable how a great con man can just cover their tracks. It's beautiful. But the formula is usually this. The opening salvo of the story on Coast to Coast is a beautiful, ornate, gripping storyline, right? It's got a premise. Doesn't have usually much of a story, but whatever. You don't really care. It's all science fiction kind of stuff. This guy said he was going to other planets and spending time there with a bunch of other astronauts, and that, NASA has these, programs, like, again, the finale of 2001, or excuse me, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where Dreyfus is taken off on the mothership. But now they switch it over to callers. So after about half an hour, they bring the callers in, and the callers are just like you and me, asking logical questions. I remember listening to this, and the guy said, the first caller said, well, okay, you go to other planets, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. He says, okay, what does it look like? What do those planets look like? And you hear this dead silence on the radio for probably, it seemed like forever. It's probably 5 seconds or so. What's the guy say? Well, it's funny. It looks just like this place. It looks pretty much just like this place. Hilarious, right? Yeah. Alien culture has asphalt highways, jam traffic, fast food burgers. Yeah, looks just like this place, right? Give me a fucking break. And George is just sitting there. He's just flushing his integrity down the drain for not jumping on this guy and going, wait a minute. You're going to tell us you went to another planet, but you're going to tell me the place looks like this? I don't believe you. You have suddenly gone from having an interesting story to having a very elaborate lie. So until you can give us a decent answer on this one, you don't need to talk anymore. You're a liar. Or I think you're a liar. Something to that effect. Yeah, we got to call out bullshit on people. We do. Right? If I said some tall tale on one of these shows, what do you think the response would be? People would eat me alive, and I would deserve it. Right? Where have we seen this before? Project Disclosure. Dr. Stephen Greer. I do not know if Dr. Stephen Greer is a good guy or a bad guy. He seems to be embedded with some agencies that are a bit questionable, but you never know. I'm not going to accuse him of anything. Just keep my eyes open and my ears open and my mind open. I believe his first conference was like 2001, where he brought together all these people on a really long conference table, or it was like a press conference table, like a panelist table. They're all facing the audience of all these reporters. And these men were going up to the podium and recalling an experience that they were involved in, and then at the very end they said, I am this person at this rank of this agency in the government, and I am willing to testify in a court of law that everything I just said is true. Very powerful. I thought that was just really super cool. But you get to the end of the conference where there's Q&A with the press, and I don't know how the subject matter came up, but one guy at the end of if you're facing the table, he's on the end of the right side, second to the last, I think. And this guy chimes in and says, well, you know what? There's like 29 different species of aliens, and I've seen a bunch of them. I've seen most of them, he says. Okay. Boy, how special did he just become in that room, right? So this British woman, I think she's from the BBC, but a British journalist says, really? What do they look like? And there goes the pause. There goes the pause of, oh shit, I am such a bad liar that I didn't think about my lie being called immediately by the press. He's sitting right there in front of the press. Now again, the IQ of someone that would embellish a lie of that magnitude is the same side of sort of lack of IQ of a person who wouldn't assume there would be a follow-up question. And he goes, and just like the Coast to Coast guy, listen to the answer. He says, well, they look like us. A lot of them look like us. Oh, okay. that certainly is convenient, isn't it, right? I think he managed to talk about Greys, Mantis, Reptilian, and the humanoids. The humanoids is very interesting. For those of you who've ever watched Westworld, I did not know it until season 2, but one of the women in the show, as a fairly main character, was Elon Musk's ex-wife, as I am told. And she has eyes that are fairly far apart inside of her skull. And there's people from the Netherlands that have these skulls. And they are now being pinpointed because someone said, oh, aren't they a weird species of, or subspecies or whatever, sect of, humanity? And let's just point a finger at them and say they're aliens. What stops them from pointing at Aborigines in Australia and saying the same thing? Because they're a very unique gene pool. They look very different from all the people in Africa. They have their own thing. By the way, just as a digression, I watched some interview with a woman when it was on Facebook or something. Maybe some of you guys saw this. It was an Aborigines woman who didn't discover modern society until she was 15. And the interview was all conducted in her native Aborigine language. And my God, this language is wild. It's beautiful. Like, she sings probably a third of the time while she's talking. It's how they do it, I guess. I'd never seen this before, but she'd start singing, and I'm like, whoa. And she's talking, and then she'd stop. And it is the most alien language I've ever heard. It's very interesting, very beautiful in its own way. So what's the problem with religion and the alien ufology group cross-pollinating these story arcs with the subjects that may or may not be actually being abducted? Because if someone comes into Dr. Jacobs' office today, if I came in and told him my story about, when I was 21 years old, some alien woke me up, he's like, are you going to be okay? I said, I guess. And then he said, well, I said, but no one's going to believe me. And he says, what would make them believe you? And I said, I don't know. And he reaches down, shows me a present that I'm pretty sure is an LP. He says, this is origami paper. I go to sleep. I wake up at 1200 in bed. I get up. I go out there. I touch it, and it's freaking soft. And I tell my girlfriend, and she's looking at me all pissed off because he was right. Never seen origami paper in my life. Had you held a gun to my head, I would have thought it was solid color paper, 8:11 aspect ratio. It's not. It's perfectly square, and it's only colored on one side, which makes it even more difficult to fold that shit because all the white has to be hidden on the inside of the object. Didn't know. But there you go. I'm reading Her Mind or whatever, and I'm reading the book Communion by Ridley Strieber at the time. I'm in the last 15 pages of the book before I went to bed that night. All right. So I go talk to Dr. Jacobs, and we're going to do this regression through hypnosis. Is he going to tell me that I'm chosen? Maybe. And if he does, he pollutes the sociological experiment of me, which is really a psychological participation. It's on a personal level that affects then the groupthink of how I perceive myself in society as a person who may have been visited by Greys. I think that's dangerous, and I think that's irresponsible. And perhaps he does not do that. I'm not accusing him of doing that. But it would seem in his post-interviews, which I watched 3.5 hours of, again, highly repetitive stuff, which is actually kind of good that he's not changing his story and embellishing further and further each time that he's interviewed. But I think that it will distract us from trying to figure out who these folks are, where they're from, and any logical questions that we posed in the last episode, right? Again, if you capture a gray alien, why does Bob Lazar have to start from ground zero on these antimatter engines that are below deck? Even if the pilot doesn't know everything about how his ship is built, he's at least going to know the basics. And supposedly, I didn't get into it, but supposedly in one of Bob Lazar's last 45-minute interviews at a podium before he disappeared a second time, he said that there's an element that I believe is in the 160s, like 161 or something, that we don't have on our periodic table. It's a metal that if you even have a tiny sliver of this metal, you energize it with electricity and it creates a gigantic field around it, which then enables the ship to basically fly through a zero ether model. According to his initial antimatter story, there's 3 antimatter engines hanging in a triangle underneath the ship, and that they sway, they lean and tilt And out of the base of the units using antimatter, because that sounds super fucking sci-fi, it creates a big bubble of no ether, and then your ship basically falls into the hole, because ether is the only thing holding it in place in the first place, and then you can achieve pretty much, I would imagine, instantaneous travel anywhere in the universe. So why these Greys, if that engine exists, couldn't come and pick up their buddies, it would only be because the GPS system wasn't reporting them back home where they went. Like they're little Magellans running around and, you know, stopping off. They're teasers if you were to be a Douglas Adams fan. Rich kids stopping off at planets, teasing farmers. But now let's go a little bit darker into this, because the one thing that Whitley Strieber got into in his book Majestic, which concerns me back then when I was 20 years old reading this book, probably even 19. The book is filed under the nonfiction area. I don't know if you can get a copy of it anymore. It used to be $5. I got it at a grocery store because it had a silver gray alien on the front and the Roswell crash in the background. Just a little illustration in foil, which is actually pretty cool. I wish I still had a copy of the book. But the book starts that he was invited to a derelict motel in the middle of the desert. A gentleman who was part of the Project Blue Book / Project Majestic is talking to him and telling him that this was real, I was part of it, and the society needs to know. So I'm going to tell you, and you're going to write this book, and the autopsy reports will be, I'll give you those, and da-da-da. It's all in the book. It's beautifully done. Regardless if it's true or not, it is beautifully done. So hats off to Whitley Strieber's ability to really write well, you know. I've seen interviews with him, and he doesn't convince me at all, right? He says that you can go to his house in upstate New York and see these things flying. He even has some videos of some lights flying in the sky down from his house, but he says he got abducted so much that he could have put a surveillance camera and been filming this. I mean, he could have gotten a piece off of them, a bunch of stuff, right? But in Majestic, towards the end of the book, he starts talking about abductions that are happening all over, I believe, Texas, of women losing their babies from their wombs. Obviously, in his story, they're being stolen by these creatures and then raised. But the other one is that kids are disappearing and that people are disappearing, and that all these people on your milk cartons, or a large percentage of them, are simply being abducted by aliens and not pedophilia-based human traffickers that are now running various political and intelligence organizations, right? And banking and royalty. So what does that do? That expunges their association with this situation, thus giving us no means of ever finding the folks that are really doing it. We have a child that goes missing in our neighborhood, and it's just a gray alien that's doing it, or some hybrid or something like that. I think that is potentially, without severe evidence and proof, probably one of the most irresponsible things in this day and age with what we know today with human trafficking to suggest. Now, that wasn't the case back in the 80s. You didn't have a lot of knowledge of this stuff without the internet. The internet's revealed a lot of things, albeit probably a ton of it untrue about certain people doing certain things. But what if this is a big cover story? Unbeknownst to Dr. Jacobs, unbeknownst to Whitley Strieber, these individuals are abducting human beings and doing away with them, the Podesta brothers. In Sigmund Freud's, nephew's or great-grandson's house. Go look that one up. I don't know what happened. I'm just telling you, there's a great breadcrumb trail on that one. Just look up Podesta, Freud, like this Sigmund Freud, and child kidnapping, and you're going to get the story that you need to dive into. Do it on YouTube. Because I believe it's the SGT channel, which I don't completely endorse anything that they say, but they did a great job looking into this. Okay, so that concerns me. Another interesting thing that Jacob said was that these people are being abducted all over New York City, and just tons of them during the day. They're inside their apartments on the perhaps 8th floor of a 40-story complex where people live, and they're being sucked through the ceiling, and they're So the physical abduction that Whitley Strieber holds to, which is that they come to his house, he identifies 3 species of aliens: the tall beige alien, which is the female gray, the shorter silver one, which is the male gray, and then these blue, like really stocky guys that have super round eyeballs. They have a helmet on that looks like a World War II helmet from the U.S., and they fill up the entire house, pick you up from bed, and they basically give you a crowd surfing experience until they bring you outside, put him on his patio onto this sort of loungy chair made out of a stretched piece of blue material, and he is secured into that, and then that is lifted up and pushed up into the spaceship. Now, why go to all that effort? I mean, God, you got the guy in the 60s or 70s that was hiking, and he just flew up just like a normal old sci-fi movie from the 50s. But now they apparently have like enterprise teleportation capabilities. It's interesting how that all evolves, right? Star Trek has four shows that have enterprise, transportation. The one in the 60s, and all of a sudden the stories and the people that are hypnotized start to evolve with the technology that they can conceive of wholeheartedly. He tells an elaborate story about a mother who was getting abducted so much that her problem was that she would never show up to events, so she wouldn't be at school with her kids. Like, she would drop her kids off, and she had a special needs child, and they would call her routinely and say, you got to pick up your kid early. They're having an episode, they're having some issues, and she would be abducted and not available, and therefore she might lose the custody of her child. Well, what archetype of religion does that appeal to? In my opinion, what is an evangelical Christian, and I keep going for that, but what is the average Christian who comes to your house trying to get you to do? They're trying to get you to convert to their church through a baptism. Again, your baptism sucks, their baptism is good. There's always some ridiculous rationale to that. Okay. But why? Because God has set up the world to extort salvation through man. Because he's such a smart God, right? Again, back in the, I can't remember what year it was. I think it was the Michelangelo days. The Vatican commissions a painting where Jesus Christ is handing a key to the Pope. They built a little building onto the edge of the Vatican. It's a little 10 by 10 room. In there is a gigantic painting of this event occurring. They then tell everyone from Rome and Europe to come look at this painting because it is the de facto moment when Christ imbued the Pope to be better than you. And you need to come see this, because if you don't, you're not going to believe it. And back in those days, it was illegal under Roman law / Vatican law to paint photoreal human beings, because they knew no one had ever seen anything photoreal. That is like ultimate CG for their era. And if you saw photoreal, you believed it as a real event. And so you walked through, you saw this, you believed it, then you left. The line that was out there, according to Sister Wendy, who had her art appreciation show in the 90s, was that the line was 11 miles long. Brainwashing. Brainwashing a paradigm of superiority of man over man, because then it allows the total pedophile organization, which is the Catholic Church, to continue doing what they do. How convenient. If the hypnotist and the ufologist and the people that get involved with this movement start to peddle this notion that the aliens are upon us, they're messing with us, and hey, maybe they are, then you're going to have to go to those hypnotic people, those hypnotists, and the people who are experts in MUFON, all these organizations, to find out what your next possible move could possibly be. Because if you don't, hey, your child could be abducted. You will be abducted. If you're one of the chosen ones, well, then you're the ambassador to these folks to get something done. Here's what I don't understand. Just like the Twilight Zone back in the day, the Great Frisbee. If you haven't seen this episode, it's fantastic. It's the one that Rick Gervais used to create his movie about something like Why Would I Lie? Or no, that's a different movie, but it's not Liar, 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 which is Jim Carrey, but it was a movie that Rick Gervais did. The guy invented Office. That essentially, no one in the world knew how to lie, and he was the first person to figure out how to do it. And so he would run around to hot women and say, I've got this medical condition. If you don't have sex with me right now, I'm going to die. And they would go in the hotel room and have sex with him. But the Great Frisbee is also where you get Mars Attack from. But it starts out in a little hardware store with this big fat guy, amazing actor, with all these other amazing actors around him, and he's telling tall tales. And they all go there to his hardware store to hear him say these tall tales. He says he has 30 degrees from, a bunch of different universities. He invented rockets. Anything you mention, he invented it. He was the first guy to break the sound barrier, ba 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 ba. And on one occasion, these two aliens pull up they're very humanoid, they pull up and need gasoline for their car. And he comes outside and says, oh yeah, this whole car, yeah, I actually invented the engine for this car, and I invented this car in general. And they're like, really? Wow. And so he keeps going on about all these things he's invented, and their eyeballs are getting huge. They're just like, oh my God, this guy's the smartest human being we've ever found. So later that night, they abduct him. And they're using the set from Forbidden Planet, 1956, Leslie Nielsen. And he goes in there and he realizes they're saying they're aliens, they look human, so he's like, yeah, whatever. And he said, well, we're about to take off. We're going to take you back to our planet, and you can share all of your knowledge because you're the smartest person we've ever met on any planet ever. And he's like, wait a minute. You haven't figured out that I'm a liar? That this is just a thing I do with my friends? And they're like, well, what's a lie? And he says, well, I don't tell the truth. I make things up, and they can't conceive of a lie. But so they don't believe him. And so they try to hold him in there. He punches one in the face, and all of a sudden their human face breaks off, and they have an alien face underneath. He's like, oh my God, and he passes out. So they put him in a little holding cell. They haven't quite taken off yet. They come in to try to give him some food, I think. They try to calm him down, and he's like, well, do you mind if I play my harmonica? Because it sort of calms me down, and I'm really nervous right now. And they're like, yeah, sure, what is that? He pulls out their harmonica, plays a note, and they can't play it for shit. And they all start dying. And he's like, oh my God, this is my weapon. And if you've seen Mars Attack, knows that, I think it was it Roy Orbison's song? I think. Whatever the song was, it killed all the aliens that were coming to get us, right? So, taken right out of Twilight Zone. The reason why I mention that episode is the following. Why would aliens be here, dragging out average individuals, telling them their plan of this special event that's going to occur? Because that's what they're all starting to say. A special event is coming, but they won't tell you what it is. Well, why wouldn't they abduct a Carl Sagan kind of guy? One of you, maybe me. We're pretty good thinkers, aren't we? If you could tell us, and we would actually become an ambassador between them and us, right? If they are in cahoots with the military, then that sort of negates all this communication with average human beings. Why would they be trying to infiltrate apartments? Because Jacobs was trying to tell us that, again, people have been sequestered in their apartments. They're not allowed to say, but they have two hybrid aliens living in their apartment. That completely goes against all this communication that supposedly Bob Lazar's talked about, where we have all these alien vehicles. There's the old man that gave the testimony with the oxygen tank in his nose at the hotel, saying that he worked for Eisenhower, and Eisenhower was like, I want to know what's in Area 51, and they kept denying him. So he was sent to Area 51 because he had the special clearance, and he met Grays, and that they were very cordial, and there was no sign of threat or anything, and that through communication of him observing and taking it back to Eisenhower was like, okay, I don't need to go. Sounds like bullshit to me, but whatever. Now, let's disengage from the seriousness of this subject, and let's go for its entertainment quality, its fascination quality, perhaps its critical thinking quality, because I think it's there. There's a lot of us that believe wholeheartedly, through either talking to people from NASA, in my case, that we didn't go to the moon. There's not a fiber in my body that thinks we went to the moon. I think Buzz Aldrin just gave another interview where he's talking to an 8-year-old girl, and he says we didn't go, and I think we should figure out why we didn't go, and and he basically admits it on camera. Now, someone could have fudged with the audio to put an "idn't" on the end of "did," but it doesn't explain the rest of his conversation, which is very detailed, which is based on "idn't." We didn't go. Sometimes you need things to jostle your mind so that you can get to a point of critical thinking. If you're like me back in the day, when you heard about this alien thing and alien abductions and any fairly well-produced alien information video from the Sci-Fi Channel, as soon as you push play on the playhead of one of these things, you start to sort of disengage your brain, and you open it up and you get this kind of adrenaline feeling of like, oh my God, this is going to be something new. This is amazing. I want to be blown away. And so you're not typically in a skeptic mindset if you are pro UFO. And think about why. I mean, is life that exciting that it would surpass in typical form an alien showing up? For those of you who haven't had kids, let me just tell you. And for those of you who have, you'll totally get this analogy. When you see your kid, whether you be the mother giving birth or the father staring down at the birth, like I've said in several episodes, God shows up to pay you a visit. And there's something magical that occurs. The significance of your responsibility shows up, and it's usually a euphoric thing. As much as you might have been worried before, God shows up and says, this is all right. Hopefully you have the all-positive experience that I had. I think when we hear about things in the alien realm, there's an entertainment quality to it that is almost like that. It is, you are perceiving, you're letting the information come in. The more beautiful someone has created graphics or sifted through the archives of photos, you go with the flow. It's interesting to you. You don't have the discernment that I think you need. There's this big push based on the receptionist of Wernher von Braun in the late 70s. Again, I think he passed in 1978. Supposedly one of his last cautions to his secretary, who's a very interesting woman to say the least, he said they are going to attempt an alien invasion storyline to unify the world under one world government. Ronald Reagan has a famous speech where he talks about that exact thing, and everyone said he went off script and he wasn't reading from the speech he was supposed to be reading, and that they said, do not mention this weird idea you have of this alien invasion. I'm not convinced it wasn't written down for him. It is an interesting notion. If we did have an alien invasion of some sort, be it good or bad, humanity is going to probably set aside a lot of its differences. Maybe. Now, what if one of the religions is very terrified of the notion of the alien invasion disrupting their control over their people, and so they go double down against the alien thing, and then they just basically try to launch rockets into space, and then we have half the humanity trying to hurt these folks, and the other half going, hey man, you want to eat dinner with us? We're going to have sloppy joes. You should try sloppy joes. I know your mouth is pretty small. We'll make little tiny burgers of it, right? The thing is if we don't start applying a lot more skepticism to the information that we already have, like Q says, you know a lot more than you know. You have a lot more than you know. I think that's true in all realms. Again, I believe every man, woman, and child is born with right or wrong inside their soul. And I am not convinced at all that anyone loses that quality despite their own delusions and their own mechanisms to try to subdue that so they can gain riches. The amount of people I have met who are worth $100 million or more who engage in really shitty business tactics, they almost make it their lot in life to step on ahead to get ahead as a contest. They know that they are wrong, and they live a torturous life as much as they might paint a smile on their face. The only thing that might disrupt that theory is someone who is extremely uneducated being blessed with a lot of wealth. They simply never really gain an empathetic bone. You never know, right? The best way to understand God, in my opinion, is to remove all organized religion away from God and start to close your eyes, feel God, feel the meditation, understand that the intangible feelings that you have around your existence is the fabric of God, and the body that you're merely temporarily owning and the world that you're temporarily interacting with is merely an instance of what your soul could possibly do, restricted only by your body in this world. When we dream, we get pure proof that there is an infinite world out there that simply creates itself by the frustum of which you're viewing, right? The world exists as you look at it, and everything behind you disappears. If you walked out of out of a gingerbread house in one of your dreams, and you turned around and looked at it, and you're like, wow, that's a gingerbread house. This is crazy. And then you turned and looked over the wilderness made of all kinds of jujubes and all kinds of things, and then you turn back to look at the house. It's going to be different because your brain ditches it as soon as you don't see it. And then when it tries to reconstruct it, it's like, okay, what do we do again? It won't be the same. That's how you figure out you're in a dream. That is sort of, and it's all photoreal, right? I mean, it's amazing. You don't have any degrees in computer graphics, but man, your brain is an amazing rendering engine. Your soul, wherever the hell we are when we dream. It is probably safe to say that if there are aliens like the ones in Roswell, people from another place, that they are in the same ecosystem of birth, death, and maybe reincarnation that we're in. They have a beginning, middle, and end. Perhaps their middle is a lot longer than our middle. Perhaps they're like elves, right? They live to be 200, 300 years old. Who knows? One of the interesting things you'll find with technical people who lie is that their lies are only built out of technical facts. It's very rarely built out of the metaphysical facts about what an alien was thinking and feeling. That's one reason why I like Jesse Marcel's Sr.'s very late testimony out in the desert, walking around sobbing a little bit, or near sobbing, where he is saying, I was here, he was here, he was telling me, I could sense this despair in him, and he was feeling that despair in the interview, like I just said in the previous episode. That's one of the first times I've ever really heard anyone get into the metaphysics of what these beings think. Now, if you read Communion by Whitley Strieber, he puts forth a very sterile view of them, in that I think it's a very logical leap that he was saying, I don't want you to abduct me, I don't want you to, and he's all into the anal probing and stuff, which is a lot of ufologists are like, please give that a rest, right? Again, like I've said in many alien episodes, there is nothing to be found in the colon of a human being that could not be found in a follicle of hair. There's no need. If they are advanced, that would be some act of total perversion and not one of any scientific quality, right? Now, the other notion that is very common in the stories of aliens, and it's portrayed in religion in one way or another. Now, that there's very few folks in religion that really go to this level, but I've met plenty of them. And the story goes like this. Especially Planet X people, right? That somehow Earth, and its beautiful blue marble, third rock from the sun, heliocentric model, has something on it that is very rare, like gold. Gold is typically in these stories, and it's just laughable, okay? Aliens are here to turn us into a slave colony, to mine gold, and it's going to be used in the atmosphere of Nibiru because they need it to save their planet, right? All that Planet X crap came and went. It's all bullshit, right? But somehow these aliens are here to abduct us, turn us into slaves, and have us farm something for them. They have the ability to travel interstellarly to tons of what we might safely assume is the majority of planets in this universe would be uninhabited, unmined, and you would imagine that if they have the ability to teleport us out of a hotel room in New York City or something, that they could teleport gold straight out of the ground in a mother lode. Hey, it's right down there at about 100 feet. And there's a piece the size of the state of California. We're just going to beam it out of the ground. We don't have to worry about hurting anyone. We don't have to get into any dispute with the local military or anything. I could just get it off of a bunch of planets. But then again, that's not romantic. That is not a story out of the Bible. That is not a story out of the lore of aliens. And so that story's never told. The one where man suffers, that's like, oh my gosh, I better listen more, is a Whitley Strieber, because if I don't listen to him, I might die. Let's buy all of his books, right? I'm picking on him a little bit, but he doesn't assert those kind of things that I know of. But I mean, he has his own thing. I believe in transformation. That's a bit like that, like they have this evil agenda, and we better all get together really soon, right? What does a religion try to do? Consolidate the population under one roof, one authority, one man, because again, God has chosen to give it to one of the most evil organizations to ever exist, because God believes that the children of this world should be sodomized by old men. That might sound extreme, but that is actually the facts. Well, at the same pace you would reject that organization from having some dominant role over you, hopefully you would do that to anyone pawning off similar archetypes and story on the alien side. This subject fascinates me. It fascinates me from two realms. As of 2018, July, or August I should say, I have a distinct belief, an overwhelming belief, that these Greys did make it to Earth in 1947. 5 years ago, I would have laughed hearing myself say that, because I hadn't done any of my research. Now I'm pretty convinced. Again, the only thing that negates that belief for me is if somehow in 47, without MK Ultra being really taken to the next level, the Manchurian stuff, and who knows what the Nazis were able to do, or whatever secret organization they could blame it on, that somehow they convinced a whole town. It's a military town, maybe, that this was all true, but it wasn't. Sounds like a lot of work. Sounds like they were able to kick it all off on one day. That sounds less and less like a Manchurian candidate, right? Would you put a whole town asleep for 6 months, get everyone programmed like Dark City, and then wake them all up and say, on this day, flying saucer. Oh, but it wasn't a flying saucer, it was a weather balloon. People were murdered who just simply saw these creatures, these beings, these people, shouldn't call them creatures. If God were this wrathful, childish creature, which I believe he is absolutely not, and I say he for the lack of a better gender, right? Then I'm not sure what mankind would do to get close to God. Because there's tons of religions on this planet. You're going to have to pick one. Within every religion, there's it's almost like an infinite shard or hologram. You break it, and there's a bunch of copies of it. So which one do you pick? And then if you pick the wrong one, you go to heaven, and you go to that pearly gate, and they go, sorry, you picked the wrong one. Take the escalator down, or the elevator down to hell, right? Yeah, that's God, yeah. Well, if you buy anything after 47, all these other stories, again, most of them don't actually inform you about any intent. There are various sightings outside of British Air Force bases. There's all this footage of supposedly craft being chased by, Russian Air Force, the South American Air Force, European Air Force, all this other stuff. Seems like there's something out there. Seems like they have different models of their ships, if any of that stuff is true. Again, with the advent of computer graphics and art students that need to graduate, you are getting a plethora of fake footage, which is stunning to watch, okay? But those with educated eyes can go, oh, I see how you did that, right? Because there's flaws in all those pieces of footage, right? We just had a thing that popped through, I think, a bunch of press. I found it on Fox News. I posted it on the locked Facebook group, which was supposedly a bizarre creature that was stalking a moose out in the wilderness. And one of our listeners, Kaz, he figured out it was just something on the windshield. The guy was filming the moose through the windshield, and there was a bug that had been squished on the windshield or something on the windshield. And as he tracked the camera, the thing that was supposedly coming up on the moose would track at a slightly parallaxed acceleration, which if you're good with eyes, he figured it out right away. I did not figure it out right away. Once he told me that's something on the windshield, boom, you see it. It's no longer a monster. It's no longer stalking this being. But my God, what if that was shown in like the 40s or 50s? I mean, that could have been an 8mm camera in a car, filmed through a windshield. No one has CG background. No one has parallaxing knowledge because they haven't made their own little video or whatever, and that would go over as truth. That's how easy it is, right? Now, we do have a lot of families that have experienced what is probably covert aircraft. Maybe they've experienced some aliens and they were exposed to radiation. Some people got really hurt by the radiation, like literally burned like the fictitious character in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is where I think these stories come from. The writers are brilliant to cannibalize events that have been claimed to have happened. And so maybe those are true. I'm not trying to discount any of that kind of stuff. I don't have enough information. I think that some of the pictures that they've drawn are a little silly, right? They'll draw spacecraft with people inside windows, and once you start doing some math of like where their feet would be, where their head would be, where their propulsion system would exist, where a bathroom would exist, the sleeping quarters, it doesn't make any sense, right? And then, of course, there's the obvious question of if they have the capability of traveling interstellarly, I'm going to assume that they're pretty intelligent, and if they want to be seen, they will be seen, and if they do not want to be seen, they cannot be seen. If you can disrupt ether around your ship, then you can create the same effect as a plasma ball, which is what a lot of things are. You know, the plasma leaks out of the Earth's crust, especially in mountainous areas where people don't live. These plasma balls during the day pop out, and they're spinning. They're a spinning ball of plasma energy. They reflect all light because light cannot penetrate plasma. That means it looks silvery. That's going to reflect, the ground towards the top, the sky towards the bottom. And they're going to find different pockets of electrical charge in the atmosphere, and there's nothing that's going to stop plasma from traveling 20,000 miles in one direction, stopping at the next pocket of energy where it can stabilize again and then pop out as soon as the atmosphere moves. The military's hitting them with radar going, oh my God, we have all these, bogeys up there that are UFOs. They're not friend, they're not foe. We don't know what they are. At night, those would glow like light. And so a lot of the lights you see over Arizona and what have you, where there's a big string of lights flying, everyone's videotaping this, and they go out one by one. Boom, 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 boom. Well, a plasma ball is going to have a finite amount of life before it decides to either vaporize or join the atmosphere in its composition. For all we know, it just simply vanishes in some Einstein-Rosenbridge thing and it just goes whoop, and it's back to some dimension that is not visible by the human eye. Now, have we had weird, Foo Fighters over Los Angeles? Yes. We had some weird crap over the Capitol building in Washington, D.C.? Yes. Did that seem like it was, the one in Los Angeles? Don't know. They hit it with a bunch of lights. There's a beautiful photograph of it. And then the ones in Washington, D.C., it's usually likened to something saying, here, I'm at your head of state. Your sovereign country, which is the District of Columbia, which should be disbanded as soon as we gain control of this country. We can't have a country inside of our country, people. That is just an IQ test we've been failing since the beginning. But it would seem that they're communicating with the authorities. Again, then why infiltrate poor people in New York and their apartments? Why even hint that something great is coming? Is that some satiating comment to say, don't resist because everything great's coming, but we can't tell you? Right? Those of you who've watched The Twilight Zone to serve man will deeply understand where that could go wrong, right? I wanted to throw this episode out there so that you guys can start seeing the correlations between organized religion and the archetypes that have existed for thousands of years, right? Again, the story of Christ is somewhere in the low 20s. I've had researchers tell me it's the 23rd time it's been told. I have another close friend of mine here in Huntington Beach who did a deep dive. He says, and he's a man in his late 60s, he's an engineer, he's a very brilliant guy, and he says, I found 26 versions of that. When I wrote this film, Cuchulainn, it's 2500 BC, and it's the virgin birth thing. When you study Egyptology, you'll find Isis and Horus having a virgin birth child. There's even a hieroglyph that is the virgin birth happening. If you go back to Queen Semiramis in Babylonia, you have Semiramis supposedly, it's a mythical thing, her husband's Nimrod, and he's the phallus of the obelisk, and he impregnates her through sun rays. She has the child Tamos. Nothing removes the statues that exist of Queen Semiramis holding her child, and it looks like Mary holding Jesus. They're exact replicas of each other. Thousands of years before this other idea came around. So man has this need to entertain himself, to use metaphor and analogy to educate man. I was at a Mormon church the other day, and they come to my house, they asked me to come to church, and I was like, sure. You're all good people. Well, see what your church is like. But I'm sitting down with one of the, I guess you could call him an elder, smart guy, and I said to him, I said, well, Jesus taught with analogy, because he said, well, you think the Bible's allegorical? And I said, well, if Jesus teaches through parables and analogies, then why couldn't Jesus himself be a parable or an analogy? Man, his face was like, oh, you're right. Wow, never thought about that. I'm like, yeah. It doesn't mean it has no value. It doesn't mean it isn't the right way to teach man at this point in time how to behave, how to reassert the Ten Commandments, which I think are sort of like the basis of do no harm thinking, right? The abduction storyline claim is one of being captured against your will. It makes these aliens seem evil in some sort of, in at least one perspective or another, right? Whitley Strieber in his book Communion said, that he said, I don't want you to abduct me. And he claimed that this Gray told him, it doesn't matter what you want. We do what we want, which is, then he likened it to a scientist performing experiments, on a rat. Well, that's something for us to think about, right? Do we harm animals to advance medication and products like lipsticks and makeups for humans? There's a whole movement in that realm, right? It creates introspection. It creates critical thinking if you allow it. So I think there's a value in this entire exercise. A lot of you know a lot about religion. You do. A lot of you also know a lot about these stories of abductions, aliens. You've done deep dives for your entire lifetime. Now, your homework for the comments section is to find correlations between religion and alien stories that have not been covered in this episode, or if you want to elaborate on something where I touched it but I didn't go that deep on it, please leave your comment down below so that we can all kind of benefit from your experience as well. Because again, this is, if you take this seriously at all, let's say you're angry with me for asserting that this could be anything other than what these people have said. Fine, that's cool. Give me your opinion in the comments, because everyone's going to benefit from your take on this. Anyway, I think you feel me. This is way better than the other episode I did. So when those episodes die, I almost think, well, that was divine. It was divine that these recording devices failed to work. If you haven't been already, please go to deepthoughtsradio.com. There's the audio, the video, the locked Facebook group. There's a Patreon page. And again, a store that will probably breathe life here very soon. Anyhow, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.